mentored others, and you'll see in his bio, he actually came back and just wrestled for the fun. And that says something about my trip. One of the things I think also is that he never left wrestling. He spent 10 years, well, first of all, we all went together to go to Iowa, purple. And the reality, he ended up at the University of Iowa, which I think made a big impact. And of course, he got into sports information. The University of Iowa had a very good program. He been here from there. But then he goes down to Memphis. And I don't really have wrestling. And quite honestly, with Memphis State, the only wrestling would be something, in the middle of the night, down the bars. But so he came back about 10 years later, and I was so happy, first of all, that he came back. He got a job, voicing the Hawkeyes, which was mostly football. I'm going to coach. But, quite honestly, he had to advocate for sports. So he's been a sports journalist for a number of years. 1988 to up to 2003, he served in that role. His passion for wrestling was evident. And I will say, he was always calling me, and I was a couple of years, he was always calling me and saying, how'd you do, how'd the wrestling team done? And when we had our Nationals Division II up in Cedar Falls in 1970, and he was there, Matt side taking pictures. And, and I was really proud of him to see that. And of course, we were like, we won Division II, but the fact is, he was there, and I knew he had a passion. So when the call came for him to become the editor of Win, first of all, and I followed Mike Chapman. Mike had done it all his life, and truthfully, he was in Waterloo as well as the state of Iowa. He was known for the wrestling movement, so Mike had to take on that challenge. And I had a little conversation with Mike, and he said, I'm going to be the editor, but he's an interview. If you've ever had the opportunity, and maybe at a time when you really didn't want to talk, to get interviewed by him, he would come to you and he would insist that you say something. And he'd have that microphone right under your nose, and quite honestly, whether you won or lost, he wanted to quote. Why? Because it was you talking, and you telling the story as a wrestler. Now again, anybody can write down sports. We see it immediately, right after something gets off the mat. National. Who beat who? And then everybody can tell stories. And Mike, his attribute is he takes that interview and he makes his story. So if you ever had the opportunity, and I hope you continue to read him, but from 2003 to just a couple of years ago, he was editor and he always had a number of stories. Now, I will tell you, get stories from wrestlers is not so easy. When you go through a wrestler, it's sometimes kind of a personal thing. It's great when you win, it's terrible when you lose, right? But the implication is that he drew out of those individuals those unique things that created these great stories. And without a doubt, that segued him in to become really known internationally. If you read his Vita, you'll realize that he was actually recruited with NBC Sports to become the researcher to help the play-by-play person to basically feed information not only from the U.S. American team, but all the international wrestlers. So if the Russians were having a great wrestler, or the Bulgarians or Iranians all had good wrestlers, he had to research them. He had to know something about them. He had to feed the information, obviously, to the play-by-play. And of course, that gave him great opportunities to meet John Smiths, Roland Gardners, and of course, the Russian Bear, which they talked something about. So I'm really proud of my brother. Obviously, I think the sport has benefited from his contribution. I'm happy to see that he's had the opportunity to be recognized as a journalist in many other countries, but to be in the state of Iowa and be recognized as a wrestling journalist is quite an accomplishment. And I'd just like for him to come up and say a few words. Thank you.
What an introduction. I know I'm the last one tonight, and I'm trying to make this as fast as I can. But I do want to try to just tell a little bit of the story. Again, for Kevin and I, it started back, I think, in 1967, when my eventual brother-in-law, Emma, pinned a guy from Columbus High School in Waterloo, and I'll never forget it. I think that's when we were like in 7th or 8th grade, 6th or 7th grade. That's about when our love for wrestling started, okay? But what Kevin didn't tell you, he was the true wrestler in our family. A two-time All-American Northern Iowa, okay? I was not. You'll read my bio, okay? I love wrestling. I got my butt kicked a lot, okay? But out of that, again, the love for wrestling never went away. Never went away. And in addition to that, I had a curiosity. And you'll find out later, in just a minute, why I had that curiosity, okay? But out of that, made me ask a lot of questions. To the degree that a lot of times Kevin and I would go on trips. And I'd be always asking, Kevin, what do you think of this? Mike, would you just shut up? Okay? I could not, okay? My curiosity just could not stop, okay? So out of that, that became journalist. That's how I got to be a journalist. You have to ask questions, you gotta ask the question. I grew up at a time when journalism was, hey, you don't take no for an answer, you go for it. Well, now, you know, wrestlers, like you said, they don't always want to do it, but they would very well. And I was fortunate to, Dan Cable, as many of you know, I spent a lot of time with Dan, okay? Anyway, many times, I'll never forget it. And here's an example right now, okay? I was the editor of Voice of Hawkeyes magazine. I was asked Dan, I can't remember what year it was. I said, Dan, you have a missing link or a weak link in your lineup. He corrected me just like that, okay? In front of everybody. He didn't put me down. He just educated. He made me understand, hey, there's more to this than just wins and losses. And that's why I took it from him, okay? And I've been fortunate to be with Dan a lot. And probably the most memorable time is when I was editor. No, I just took over Win Magazine. And I got a chance to visit with Dan. We were sitting across his desk. Dan paid me a compliment. That was great. He said, hey, Mike, you guys are doing a great job with Win Magazine. I just said, hey, Dan, I appreciate it, but we're going to do a lot better. I'll never forget this. Dan Cable sitting across the desk, okay? He gets up, walks behind his desk. I don't remember this, Dan. He puts his finger in my chest. He goes, Finn, that's what I'm talking about. Don't just be good, be great, okay? And that was the attitude that I took. I'm sorry, Matt, and all the wrestlers. By the way, I hope I've interviewed a lot of people here. Those I did not, I apologize. Because I truly believe wrestlers have the best stories in the world. I've interviewed athletes from all sports, every level, okay? When I took the Voice of Hawkeyes job, he was right. It was a big football thing, or basketball, whatever. I wanted to cover wrestling. Unfortunately, I had something like the Iowa program. But I also had the Iowa State program, the Northern Iowa. There was so much great wrestling in the state that people need to say. I want to say that. But before I close tonight, I'm fortunate I have a lot of my family here tonight. And I'll try to be real brief. Kevin and I were the only two that really wrestled, but we were a wrestling family, okay? I'm going to start real brief, okay? And I'm going to start with my dad. He's no longer here, and I wish he was. If you ever went to the University of Northern Iowa wrestling meet in the 70s and 80s, if you saw a little Irishman sitting on the front row, maybe a little camera or whatever, that was my father, Mark Finn, okay? He loved the sport. He's the one who got us going. And now I need to talk about my mom, okay? She's going to be turning 101 years old here. This woman will last a lot more mother, okay? They should have wrestled, okay? They should have wrestled. They did not, and they showed me how tough women can be. And that leads me being the father of 2 daughters, okay? None of them wrestled. None of them wrestled. But they did follow me in the press box. But there was an old saying in the media, okay? No cheering in the press box. So whereas a lot of people wanted to go on cheering the Hawkeyes, Cyclones, Panthers, whatever, like that. But in the meantime, they would also help me write stories. I'm going to have to tell you 2 stories. One about my oldest daughter, Katie. And she was a high school senior, I think. She went up and covered the Big Ten tournament in a snowstorm. The car broke down. She still got there. She got me the stories. And if she did it, she was like the only girl at that time that covered wrestling. Okay? And then my other daughter, Kelly, okay? Also, she was in high school, okay? Came over to the Midlands, okay? To cover the tournament. Many times I would ask her, hey, go get a quote from that guy, okay? Y'all remember Mark Perry, wrestled on Island, okay? I had asked Kelly and I said, make sure you get it. So, good old Kelly goes down there, okay? Well, if you're ever in the Midlands, and Kelly also was too nice. She didn't want to come up and say, hey, Mark, give me a quote, okay? She follows him over Midlands, whatever. She ends up in the men's locker room. Okay? You still got a quote, okay? So, anyway, I've been very blessed to have a family. I also have very blessed to have a great girlfriend, her name is Deb. She's a teacher. She's been a muse for me in the last 10 years when I needed it, because I did retire just recently, but I needed the energy. So, in closing, I will say the business of journalism has changed. Technology has changed. So you're probably not going to get a lot of people like me who did the print, who would write their own stories. But you've got to know, all of you have stories. So I would say to journalists, wrestlers, and coaches, keep sharing your stories, because wrestling is the best sport in the world. Thank you very much.